Welcome to the panel on Mastering Filmmaking with ACES, your secret weapon for color management. Thanks for being here. We have a really fabulous panel. I will introduce them, starting directly to my left. We have Stu Maschwitz, who's an independent filmmaker and software designer with Maxon, correct? Next to him is Rory Gordon, who's a colorist and a member of the Colorist Society, and he's at Keep Me Posted FotoKem. And then last but not least, Michael Maloney, Senior Manager, Image and Color at Marvel Studios and Walt Disney Studios. So it's a stellar panel. I really don't need to say anything. They're going to say it all. First of all, how many out there, raise your hand if you're familiar with ACES, what ACES is. So most, if not everybody, is familiar with ACES. But just to make sure, I put up a slide that describes it. And Rory, you're going to give us a little introduction describing what ACES is, right?
Yes.
Thanks.
So ACES is open source standardized color management that utilizes input display transforms and output display transforms and allows us to work in a lot of intermediate color working spaces as well as conform to standardized outputs as well.
Okay. Does anybody have do you want to add anything to that, Stu or Michael? Or do you think that covers it?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I think the one thing that is helpful to me too is that to ACES, to me, it's a framework. It's a system. It's more than just a color space or a bunch of complicated acronyms. It's really just describes a very simple workflow that we've been able to utilize across a wide variety of productions in a really simple way that's open to the industry and our creatives.
Okay.
And I might just add to that if you're like a filmmaker or a cinematographer or someone who's not very technical, ACES is this great gift of it doesn't matter what camera you shoot on. If you've ever tried to match two cameras together, you don't have to try anymore because they've done it for you. It's just a free little gift that someone gave you where you can shoot on whatever camera you want and have a unified post pipeline and then output to whatever you want. What a lovely gift to the filmmaking community that is.
Right. I think what you're, everybody is saying here is A, it's a standard, and B, it's a workflow. Before there was ACES, was there a way to manage color? How did people manage color?
Yeah. So I think anybody that's working in a log-based workflow has the ability. First of all, we're starting with a large color volume, and we're starting with a log image with high dynamic range and a original gamut, so whether that's airy white gamut, IPP2, whatever. So as long as we were working within a log-based workflow and we had a way to manage what's coming in, then if we had a place in the organization, and I think that's the part that's really key. It's the color management part. The managing is the part that the people are here to do rather than the pipeline, and the pipeline supports us, whether it's log-based or ACES. It's the big difference here is that this is the ODT is standardized, not the RRT is standardized.
And Michael, what did you guys do for color management over at Marvel and Disney?
So I think to answer the question prior to ACES, at the studio we partnered with different post houses, our greatest post houses that manage and the workflow that ACES describes is very similar in practice to what the industry has done. But what I've seen that has made ACES very helpful is that it's expressed it in a simple way for different departments outside of maybe dedicated post houses that have brilliant color scientists that are dedicated to that field, that we've now shared that knowledge across different software applications. So, the messaging at the studio kind of prior to ACES was you'd always hear about this thing of secret sauce or not knowing. And prior to my time at the studio, I worked in the visual effects industry at various houses like Digital Domain, and it was always a question of not fully understanding what was happening on set, what happened at the dailies process, and then conversely when it goes into finishing, what that is. And so what this has done is it's exposed it, so it's more than just one specialized focus per department. From capture to the final image, we're able to openly communicate these workflows so that from on-set, dailies, editorial, VFX, and to finish, we're all able to see the same thing.
And Stu, you laughed when I said, what did you do before ACES for color management?
It's just the painful memories come back, because I think it's a great juxtaposition to go from professional workflows with secret sauces to my kind of emphasis. I also come from a visual effects background, but as a filmmaker, I'm broke. So I'm hyper focused on accessibility. And so an independent filmmaker or someone trying to sort of find their way into the creative parts of filmmaking still needs to deal with color. And we've found ourselves shoehorning color pipelines based on, what was previously available, which in some cases was like an ICC color management system that was based off of the needs of print. And that just never acknowledged the needs of filmmakers. So we were in the kind of trying to take, tools from other disciplines and apply them to the filmmaking needs. And it was never a good fit.
I do think ACES has done a really good job at kind of normalizing the idea that we are going to have different deliverables, and no matter what the color management is, we need to be aware of that piece of the pipeline, especially with, broadcast. There's so many displays out there, and, Dolby Vision, dynamic metadata. We just have to be cognizant that we're going to have more than one target color volume. We just are. So we need to have pipeline and people to support that.
And I think that would be especially acute for big tent motion pictures and episodic TV, where they're getting wide distribution, tons of versioning.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to. I think just as important as the finishing facility having a good pipeline is being able to support and go back and forth with VFX vendors too. Because if anybody doesn't win, we all don't win. But if everybody wins, we all win. You know what I mean? Like everybody needs to win in order for it to work.
We're going to get into VFX a little bit later with Stu, actually, but good point. Michael, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
No, I think everybody's explained it, very well, is that the amount of deliverables has continued to expand. And especially coming to places like NAB, one area is that we all see new technology and a fancy new TV. And the reality is, even in some areas, HDR has kind of been an old term in the TV space for a while, but for content creation, it's still a challenge. But ACES helps provide a framework that allows big and small vendors alike to build a system to kind of lean towards into that. And so it's been really valuable.
So I think, ACES has now been out on the market since 2014, 10 years. That's a long time. And initially, I think there was a lot of sense of, you have to be a geek or an engineer to understand it. So many acronyms. Have you seen people around you and kind of adapt to it? Do they still feel like they need to be engineers to understand it?
So at Marvel, actually, they hired me at Marvel when they first introduced me as a pipeline supervisor for the studio. They had just recently introduced ACES for their framework, kind of starting with Guardians 2 and Spider-Man Far From Home, Homecoming, actually. And at that time, it was very much the big facilities like ILM. They had an understanding, but they had a team of technical directors and software that could help implement it. And it was a challenge, at first, kind of getting it. That the larger visual effects houses adopted it very quickly. But what we've seen now, and so when I started there, what we would do is, with every ACES kind of production that we would employ, it would be my job to make these kind of custom nuke templates that kind of broke everything out to provide to vendors that were not ILM, say, for example, to do that. And now, with our productions, we are now ranging from, Marvel Studios using it over to smaller Searchlight Studios productions using it. And I've started to ask these smaller vendors, oh, do you need us to build a custom nuke template, to describe ACES? And now they're just like, no, we got this. It's implemented in our software. We know what it is. We know how to use it. And it's like, oh, great.
So that's interesting. So in other words, my impression was initially it was only used for big tentpole type movies. And I know Marvel was an early adopter, correct? And when did it start to loosen up and go to smaller films?
So for us, at the Walt Disney Studios, it did start at Marvel. I don't want to speak for Lucasfilm, but other places as well were using it. It wasn't just Marvel for sure, but just from my purview, it was kind of more introduced on the big kind of tentpole films. When we then transitioned to the Disney Plus productions, where we're maybe utilizing and work with vendors that are not the kind of big key players. We then adapted ACES into that workflow. We then started introducing it to Disney live action productions, 20th Century and Searchlight. And just over time, we've been expanding it as far as its use case. Again, what's nice in terms of the use of ACES is it is, at least in my opinion, a framework. And it's a very flexible framework. So you can build a system that's very complex for a tentpole, or just use what comes with OpenColor.io in the software so for example, our Marvel animation features, we don't have to deal with, all these different cameras and maybe having to build custom input transforms, partnering with the Academy on, or building all these custom looks. We basically use what's available in OpenColor.io today and keep it as simple as possible. So it's given us that range of flexibility.
So it's flexible, in other words, is what you're saying. And Rory, you come from the world of episodic TV, right? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your work and, when you started using ACES for your television work?
I think I've done 4 titles or so all the way in ACES. It really depends on the show. That's the thing about episodic is that usually there's a choice at the beginning of the season of, depending on camera formats, HDR options that are going to be delivered, what is the right choice for that show. I had a show that was part of the concept was part of it, a large chunk of it was from the point of view of phones and devices. So having a framework in the color corrector that allows for easy tagging of IDTs is really, really, for input display transforms is really, really helpful, in order to make sure that I got everything normalized pretty quickly. And, I'm not going to have, because, television's a marathon, 900 shots in 2 days, you just got to go. So making tagging and organizing of material not a time suck is, it's been really helpful.
So the showrunners are beginning to understand that it's an efficiency tool. Is that how they see it then?
Honestly, I would prefer that the showrunners not think about their color management or have to worry about it. I would prefer that they just feel that their show has been managed and the scenes are just gone.
Right. I think you brought a clip along, which I can play. Shall I play your clip?
Yes.
Tell us. You want us to say anything about it before I run it?
This is Parish on AMC. That's, I think episode, 4 is airing this Sunday, and check it out.
I came back from my family. I will do anything for them.
Oh. I'm in need of a driver with a particular set of skills.
Yeah, I can drive. Who are these people?
They human traffickers, man. Most men may get out and they dip their toes back in after a couple of months.
After this job, I am out.
What the hell was Dad into?
Before I met your mother, I led a different kind of life.
Parish. In a long time.
think you can control everything.
That was not my fault, mate. We'll get us out of this.
He needs to pay for what he did.
I had no choice.
We always have a choice.
I'm tired of being the passenger in my own life.
Am I a good man? Am I a good man?
I'm completely off axis, so I trust that if
I totally want to see that, Jonah.
Can you walk us through that with, how the role that ACES played in that scene we just saw?
Well, in a show where, in an ACES show where I do look development, I will set up a slightly different, node tree than in a show where I'm being passed, a look or something like that. But in, look development land, I would set up, I would concatenate basically the correct IDT for the hero camera, the RRT, ODT, and then in the middle, that would be where I make my creative decisions. And then when I move to the finishing, I have in the project level, usually I've set up my IDTs and my ODTs, and I have my corrections done, at the function level from that look development tree. So I'm able to slot them into my finishing tree and basically, have a lot of those decisions in a space that's appropriate for finishing. And you can do that in any log-based workflow too. For me, again, the key is the management, is making sure that the choices that we make for dailies are, we've been able to express ourselves in the right, the right color volume. People are able to monitor on set. And I actually no longer view it as, look design with a single LUT. It's a look design suite now, because we want the SDR target, and the HDR target. These are, I design that's all done at the same time, for me, to make sure that there's as much parity, as possible between, all the options, because that, viewers and also EPs are gonna consume, as they very well may bounce back and forth between SDR and HDR. So, I would say look development, that's where color management is really, critical for me, so that I can slot in all of my choices into multiple color target volumes, pretty painlessly.
So do you foresee that people more and more using ACES for episodic TV then?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are using ACES, and certainly color management. It's the managing part. Sorry, I keep saying the same thing over and over again, but
lots of shots.
Nobody needs a drinking game. It's Tuesday. They've been here 3 days already.
By the way, I am going to be able to take questions from the audience. Hold on to your questions. We have a few more to get through up here, and then I'll, hand it to you. So, filmmaking with mobile phones is a fairly new thing, not a brand new thing. And then Stu, of course, has taken it a step further and applied ACES with content that he acquired on an iPhone. So, Stu, why don't you walk us through how that came about?
Yeah, so for years, I guess my fascination with accessibility of filmmaking tools led people to assume that I would be interested in trying to shoot professional stuff with my phone. And I told them that is not okay. You can't actually do that. And so, but I would kind of begrudgingly lug around a larger camera a lot of the time. I mean, I definitely appreciate the benefits of large cameras and whatever, but I'm extremely lazy as a filmmaker. And so, thankfully Apple came along and, came out with this thing, which is the iPhone 15 Pro. This is the bigger one. And I've got a little hand grip on it here. And what they've added to this phone is the ability to shoot ProRes in a log format. And that log format isn't directly ACES, but it's compatible with ACES. And so I've gone on a little journey of shooting some footage with this and processing it. And we can look, I guess, at that clip, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about what I did. Can we play the, okay. Know anything about it? So if you can read the text, in some of these wipes, you're seeing the original iPhone log footage, then kind of like a naive conversion to Rec 709 video, and then a global version. So that was my trip to Peru. Then I went to Taiwan. I think I did a better job in Taiwan. Again, we're talking about 4K, essentially uncompressed video, shot on a phone while I'm on a family vacation. This is literally me sticking my phone out the sunroof of a taxi and shooting in a variety of situations here. So this is all graded and resolved, and not all of the grading takes place in a pure ACES environment, but my company Maxon makes this amazing tool called Magic Bullet Looks for design look footage, and it's compatible with ACES. So ACES becomes the conduit that I can use to get a shot with this into a tool I'm familiar with, creating a look. Then I get all the benefits of the golf, the look tracking, all the wonderful kind of playback and color management stuff. I get to the look development tool that I'm comfortable with, and I get to output something. So I can take the shot, preview and trust the thing.
Tell us a little bit about the Maxon tool you just mentioned.
Yeah, so Magic Bullet Looks has been around. I demoed it here very quickly in 2005. And so it's basically a tool for developing, it's a look development tool, and the very first version of it reflected my background in visual effects. We did a lot of our processing in a photometrically linear color space, and we had like a camera tab where you could define the input color and an output tab. The problem is that we didn't know what the hell we were doing, and also life was a lot simpler back then. People weren't shooting on consumer cameras that had log formats and things like that. So we eventually took those features out and then slowly had to add them back in as our customers wanted them more and more. Then along comes ACES, and again, to me, it was a gift because I'm trying to design a look that is the same creative intent regardless of the camera that it comes from. So if I can just take away the part where the camera has any meaning at all, and just say, whatever the camera is, bring it in, we bring it into this unified space, and we design a creative intent. And then we can go out to whatever format we want to go out to. So to me, it's incredibly liberating in that way. And so now the backbone of this, our fundamental color tool at Maxon, Magic Bullet Looks, is ACES. All of our internal processing is ACES. So that's kind of the other side of it for me, is that as a filmmaker, it's been this gift of accessibility to a professional pipeline. But as a tool maker, it means that I can now forget about the boring part and just focus on the creative part.
And was ACES kind of plug and play? Did you need to call Apple and work out how to use it, or was it just easy?
It was plug and play in the sense that we had already developed a pipeline that was based on some image adjustments are good to be done in a photometrically linear color space, if that means anything to anyone here, and some of it is good to be done in a log color space. And so we already had that concept internally. It was pretty easy to transpose the ACES equivalents of that into it. It did mean what we wound up pulling out of it was that most of our looks had this kind of built-in kind of film-like S-curve. And I think what we haven't talked about here is that if you just kind of get ACES off the shelf, one of the ways it's been transformative for the 3D artist community is that ACES was a way to view your HDR rendered, pixels in a way that had kind of a as if it had been photographed appearance. And so that's where it really struck up the interest of the people downstairs at the Maxon booth who are making beautiful 3D art. ACES was a way for them to say, oh, now that looks like a camera shot it instead of like a computer rendered it.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to switch over to also talking about how digital visual effects kind of spurred on the adoption of ACES. And you're nodding your head. All those Marvel movies had lots and lots of visual effects. What did ACES give? Why did the visual effects community adopt it so quickly?
I think a lot of it started in visual effects because they were, they had this notion of photometrically linear, or this notion of like scene referred, is something that visual effects had started with working with very early on. So that was one area. The other big piece of this, so it was easier for them to adopt in that sense. I think another key area is they are very much sandwiched in the middle of making sure they are matching what everyone's seeing in editorial and what was captured from on set, and then also delivering to a finishing facility and making sure that that is represented. So they were in the middle. They really had the kind of technical chops for that kind of initial time, but also really saw the advantage.
So they saw the benefit right away.
They could get that transition as smooth as possible.
Do you have that experience also, Rory? I mean, a TV show isn't necessarily full of visual effects, but
it depends on the show. Some of the really good ones are invisible. I mean, I think I would take away that the different rendering intents for different having the same rendering intent rather for different environments is really valuable. And I think, again, another thing that ACES has done is make us talk about that in different settings. Like, it is appropriate for a VFX vendor to have a linear space to render in. It is appropriate for a log-based workflow in color a lot of the time. And I think, resources like ACES Central, being able to, bounce ideas off of other ACES users. I would include Colorist Society International also in that, just having, of course, there's world-class. It's nice to work with world-class color scientists and colorists at a place like Keep Me Posted and FotoKem, but having those other communities too, because when we have different vendors or different pieces of the pipeline that can be forgotten about when we're so deep in our own niche, it is nice through a framework like ACES to be aware of the fact that there are different needs for different parts of the process.
Thank you. And you also, Stu, come out of the visual effects world originally, and you have a visual effects clip to show. Should we show the clip and then you can talk about it, or do you want to introduce it?
Yeah, no, why don't we just play it, and I'll start talking at some point.
Not that one. Next one.
So in my youth, I worked at ILM. Yeah. I was saying I worked on the Brian De Palma Mission Impossible movie, and I worked on the shots where we put the helicopter in the tunnel. So I thought it'd be fun to recreate that. So this is literally shot with my iPhone strapped to the back of my pickup truck. This is what it looks like just to put a LUT on top of it. But the thing about this I want to emphasize is that by converting the footage to ACES and then converting it to this linear format, it becomes an HDR scene referred image, which means that I can map it onto this rough geometry, and now I can use it as a light source for this rendered helicopter. I would have loved to have this in 1994, but no. So that's lit by the plate that I shot, again, with my telephone that I used to call my wife and tell her how well this panel went. And you can see in that little chrome ball there, you can see what the geometry is reflecting and why it looks so good. I mean, this is so easy. This is so ridiculous. I did this whole thing in basically a day. It took us a lot longer to do Mission Impossible. And then a little bit of compositing. Be able to pull this off without a And by the way, this is all 4K as well. So the key there is that the 3D rendering, like, we need a language to talk back and forth, right? So I could do this without ACES, but I would have to like invent some way of saying what do these pixels mean. But because our 3D render engine, our compositing systems, they all understand what ACES is, it becomes this lingua franca for me to build a little mini pipeline here.
Rory, did you want to say something, add something there? Look like you had something to say.
Well, I think that I just keep going back to the important thing is that we're talking back and forth and specifying these things, because it's, like I say, it's even in the most sophisticated pipeline in the world, there can be wild card cameras that were, second unit was in a different, had a different, different gamut or something for the day. So I really think that the most radical notion of the whole framework is that there's categorization and discussion of all our where we all fit together.
Yeah, like
solve the same problem.
In the VFX industry, many, many, many years ago, we had this wonderful format come up, an open format called EXR for handing back and forth linear data. But if a fellow vendor that I was working with in a visual effects capacity gave me EXR files, I would have to ask them
exactly
what format, like what colors are these?
Right.
Because there was no way to describe it, right? So,
and we still do need to confirm because things can, can change.
But at least you got a language you can use to describe it back and forth, right?
Yeah, I think at the studio we ask that our vendors send everything back as ACES AP0, what I call the big ACES. And we do understand that there's a working interchange that vendors may not work in that space, but again, it gives us that framework of that common knowledge. And so even if that facility, that other vendor wants to work in their own space, they can, as long as we have the math, which ACES provides, to go to and from losslessly to however they're working. And then at the studio we can share. So another thing that we have a lot is now we have, as visual effects becomes more complex, we have a lot of shared shots. So we may have not just one, we'll have 15, 20, 25 vendors on a show, and sometimes we'll have 2, 3, 4 vendors working on one shot. But the ability to share and loop that information, again, using ACES as that common framework has been a lifesaver, quite frankly.
Interchange, baby. That's it. That's the key.
So going forward, I mean, I'm curious, Michael, you were saying how even Searchlight Pictures now are going ACES. Are you picking and choosing which go? How does the process that a film adopts ACES? Or do you tell them to do that? Do they decide to do it?
So, Eddie Drake, he's our head of studio technology, primarily for Marvel Studios. He embraces this notion called civilized filmmaking. And what he means by that is we're not going to put everyone in a box. We want to make a framework and a system that allows things to be efficient, but we also don't want to inhibit creative choice. So we still want to be as filmmaker friendly as possible and allow for that flexibility. So to answer your question is no, we don't say you have to do this, you have to do this. What we have found is just as more and more shows have used it, they've now started to see the value of it. So it's no longer you need to do this. It's like, oh, this is helpful. So on for the Searchlight Studios, they weren't necessarily using ACES, or there's no mandate or anything. It was more of for shows that, so we have a division at the studio called the Motion Picture Plates Lab. And what that means is we debayer the camera raw and deliver for turnovers for plates. And we deliver all those things in ACES AP0. And so that's allowed them as an introduction to a framework that, again, not just the color space, but it's kind of the entryway into explaining to them kind of this interchange of how they can work, and they've seen just the value in it without having to force it.
So do you foresee someday where it's just going to be the standard that everybody uses, or do you think there'll still be people who are just not interested?
I think there's always going to be use cases and creative needs that we're going to need specialized things. And that's a value. You know, we use that. I think it's just now it's more of a discussion that they see it as a value. And when they need to break the rules, we allow them to, and we just kind of describe to them, here's maybe some additional work that might be as a result of it. But we've seen over time, it's just not a conversation anymore. It's just like, yep, the EXRs are in ACES. Cool. Great. Thank you.
And Rory, what about you? I mean, you have no decision-making power in what shows adopt ACES or not. What's your experience with showrunners and the people who come into your suite?
Well, we do. I mean, we really talk about it as a show, but it is show by show. It is what is the right choice for the show? What is the right tools for designing this? And there's also the universe where we're working in color management and we're delivering an ACES archival element as well. So in cases where there is like something really specialized, something that's, come from a lot of elements with maybe bespoke pieces to it, that's an option too.
So they come to you in pre-production and you suggest ACES from the get-go?
My experience is not like it's never a creative team side of like, we would like you to use ACES, please. It's just like what makes sense for this entire department as a big organism that exists as a unit. So, that would be involve discussions with the studio too, the post producer. I do have DPs that feel strongly one way or another. And it's like I said, it's a decision of the unit. It's not really, and then you just, lay out all the information and reassure people that great choices come in all color volumes.
And to Stu, it sounds like, you're pretty much going to do ACES on your projects going forward, your indie film projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's going to have a role no matter what, certainly because of its compatibility as this glue layer with any workflow I want to do. So if I have a VFX component to it, that's going to be the way that we're going to talk back and forth. The other thing that I'm noticing in terms of adoption on the software and tools side is that, I think, was it a year or two ago, Adobe started to integrate OpenColor.io and ACES into After Effects, which is a tool that I use a lot. And that really seemed to sort of uncork an awareness that like the Adobe way of color management wasn't, working for filmmakers. And what that does for us is it just means that, again, now we have this common language. So if I want to make a cool tool for filmmakers that does the cool stuff with color, I can have a drop down and just say, hey, what color are you working in? And the simplicity of that and the understanding and the way that now, like I used to write about this stuff on my blog. I've had a blog, like a nerdy color, filmmaking blog, prolast.com for years and years and years. And I never thought, like, I always thought I was the one going around like the broccoli salesman trying to get people to think color management was useful or important, like flossing or whatever, And instead what's happened is that artists have like been beating down my door saying, tell us about color management. Color management is cool and interesting. And I never thought I would live long enough for that to be the case. But people are seeing the creative possibilities that are unlocked when color is handled, like really managed in a way that actually is liberating and empowering to a creative.
So that must be very exciting for you.
Oh, it's great. I mean, it's just, yeah, I wouldn't want to say that it's like solved every problem, but it's like, being lost in a different country is a lot different if you speak the language, and we have a common language now.
Right. Did either of you wanted to add anything to that? The last question I'm going to get to is, I mentioned that ACES debuted 10 years ago. It's had quite a number of versions that added new features, fixed bugs. And now ACES 2.0 is coming out. It's now in the hands of developers. My understanding is you've all had a chance to take a look at it. Can you reveal some of the things you've learned about ACES 2.0? What do we have to look forward to?
Inversibility.
That was going to be mine. You stole mine.
Okay. Go. Tell us more.
That's mine too.
Tell us more.
Being able to know that we'll be able to round trip things through the process and end up in the same place. That's the deal.
Yeah, the new output transfer, the new rendering transform is very visually appealing, and I think it's a great choice for people. And I think it's also got added benefits that we've seen in some of our testing. We haven't used it on the production yet. We're still in the kind of the testing phase, but the kind of perceptual uniformity between SDR and HDR. We have some filmmakers that are sensitive to how radically different those may or may not be. And we've seen in our tests the appearance, the perceptual appearance between those two is pleasing. So we're excited about that. And the reality of it is especially at the studio level, we have things like one thing we call the Marvel red, the Marvel Studios banner. It's like we need that to look the same everywhere, and we need to be able to go to and from with the things and make sure some of these very iconic pieces can go to and from. And we have a lot of productions that are before ACES, are not using ACES, and we need to implement workflows that can have that flexibility. So that's a big one for us.
Did you want to add to your one word description? Nope. Okay. What about you, Stu?
Well, I want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience too. But just one quick thing about it is that when you work for a client or when you have source material coming from a variety of sources, sometimes it comes to you in kind of a baked, already prepared for output format, and being able to invert that what was presumably the output transform of that image and bring that back into the ACES space. It's sort of like being able to unsear a piece of tuna and serve it as sushi, which is a magic trick, and we've never had that ability before. So
sounds great. And I should bring up also that ACES can contact with ACES there. My understanding is ACES 2.0 came about as a result of a lot of demand and conversation with users. So using ACES also means that you can be part of the conversation of what it becomes next. All right, questions. I guess I will jump into the audience and hand people the microphone. Questions?
Just real quick, out of curiosity, are any of you guys working on shows currently where the VFX pipeline is ACES and you're doing other pipelines for other things? Or, I mean, just out of interest, I think that's like something that a lot of people don't talk about. It's like, it's great because it goes through all these softwares. And if you have something, I work in unscripted a lot, to be fair, but if you have something else you like using for other footage, like it's still great tools for that, I think. But I'm curious if you guys have done that on shows or seen that done.
I think, kind of like to the question of like VFX being early adopters, I think what I've seen a lot of visual effects facilities have worked internally at ACES as their internal pipeline, regardless of whether or not maybe other components of that production is working in ACES. And that's where the key to invertibility and interchange, that level of flexibility is really valuable. We don't want to, now we've kind of adopted it a lot on the studio side, but if there are productions where they make different choices, we have that flexibility to share amongst different departments and have an open resource to understand the to and from to manage that. So yeah, it happens quite a bit, actually.
We just get on the phone usually, and talk it with a specific vendor. Yeah.
Yeah, for me as a sort of a more small scale production, I do all of my 3D rendering in ACES, and I don't do that because I'm hoping to be compatible with some amazing output formatter that it's going to be projected in an IMAX theater. I do it because it gives me just the right amount of a wider color gamut to work in, so that my results look predictable and like what I'm expecting in terms of like my cinematographer's eye, right? So like if I'm working in sRGB, I can't even render a Macbeth chart, cyan falls off the edge of it, but if I render in ACES, I can not only depict that cyan accurately, but I can shine an orange light at it and get a result that's almost as if I had done some sort of elaborate spectral rendering kind of workflow or whatever. So it's like just the right amount of extra room to work for me that allows me, just enough room to move my elbow so I can sync the full shot, and that's been, that's, I could never go back from that. Like it's just been a very freeing thing. And then to stack on top of that I could share that file with somebody and describe it in one word and they'd know exactly what it is. It's great.
Other questions? Raise your hand.
I'm curious about deliverables. You guys talked about how there may be multiple things that you're kicking out for any one particular show. So how does ACES help you get to all those multiple buckets that you're trying to hit with your deliverables?
Yeah, different ODTs. We would, in project level management have, and I work with LMTs as well. And I've got, my LMTs are designed for Rec 709. I have, Rec 2020 with P3, primaries constrained, all different flavors. Yeah, it's, as far as the ODT is concerned, actually a thing that helps me is I have a physical checklist. Every time I do an HDR pass, it's like a laminated sheet of paper of like, I checked my ODT, I checked my LMT, I checked this setting and this setting. And, I think it is really important to dot all the T's and cross all the I's and pass this information along to assist and support people as well, so that the whole team is aware of it.
Yeah, the key thing I think is that it's when using, I think it's really important to note, give a shout out to OpenColor.io, who's implemented ACES into a lot of the software that our artists are using today. This notion of what we've call it scene referred, and what that allows is that for the artist, they don't need to be thinking about that, but under the hood, they're working with imagery that has a lot of latitude. And so when they deliver that to, say, a colorist, it has all that latitude in there so that if you're making something for SDR, just a kind of typical like TV, it has the range for that, but it also has enough range for HDR. And then it has that framework for those different deliverables, and the file that's being passed around has that range to support those different deliverables.
Yeah, it's non-destructive. The choices happen in this working space that has the option to be scaled to a smaller container or a larger container. But the important thing is that the working space is non-destructive.
Other questions? Raise your hand.
Can I ask a question of the two people who actually know what they're talking about? So how much of your, back to the deliverables thing, so just the bare bones idea of you've got a SDR and an HDR deliverable, how much of that can you leave as a automated conversion process versus how much of that needs to be reworked on like a shot by shot or look by look basis? I know you are all wondering that. Now we get to know.
I would say that where we are using the HDR output transforms specifically are at this moment a lot of times for a technical check for basically either on set for viewing, for visual effects review. I'm really curious to see what you say, Rory. I think on the finishing side, we still see there's still very much a creative component. I think one thing that's nice about the HDR transforms as well is that there are some options. Just because something can go to 1,000 doesn't mean we want it to go to 1,000. So there is some
Thank you for that. My eyeballs. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I kind of think of color management as like a pyramid. You have your kind of ODT, RRT rendering level choices. Those are the biggest choices that are going to move the most amount of data. We've got kind of the next level up, which is the LMT, which is, like I mentioned, I would design that for Rec 709 and my HDR version at the same time. So when we get to the deliverables, no one is surprised. I would like everyone to feel like it's the show that we started with the whole way through. Next, I make creative choices on a group level, but basically I get smaller and smaller until the shot level, where my shot level choices are really details. And the goal is that those hold, because that is the stuff of relationships, not only inter-shot, so like spatially inter-shot, but temporally inter-shot, shot A to shot B, cutbacks needing to match and all that. So that to me, like the medium of cinematographers is light. My medium as a colorist is time. So I want the piece to feel cohesive over the entire run of the show. I want it to feel cohesive SDR to HDR. That is my piece of the puzzle. And part of my piece of the puzzle is making good, like, systems level choices at the beginning of the process. So pre-production is pre-production.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we're going to bring it to an end right now. Let's thank these amazing panelists who joined us today. And thank you all for coming. And some of these guys might linger for a bit if you wanted to nab them for some more questions. Thank you so much for coming.